In this section, we're going to talk about compliance. And so, a level of conformity basically is compliance. And this is the process of changing one's behavior in response to a direct request from another person. It's often motivated by desire to avoid negative consequences or obtain rewards. So, if you're a fan of the Hunger Games, you may have noticed the way the citizens of the districts reluctantly follow the capital's oppressive rules and traditions. They are conforming to to the capital's demands, including sending their children to participate in Hunger Games as tributes. Now, compliance occurs when a person changes their behavior. Again, that's at the request or an ask of someone else or a group. Um, it's common and important in important social behaviors, as it allows us to coordinate our actions with others and achieve common goals. And there are several factors that influence compliance. It often involves individuals temporarily changing their behavior to align with the requests or rules or expectations of others. And these changes in behavior may not necessarily reflect the long term commitment or internalization of their requested action. Instead, compliance is just typically resulting from external pressure or those incentives. It's also frequently driven by those extrinsic motivations, such as rewards or avoiding punishment. You can also look at social approval or fear of the consequences as those motivators. In other words, individuals comply because they expect to gain something or avoid something negative, not necessarily because they inherently value or believe in the action that they're asked to perform. Compliance also tends to produce short lived effects. And once the external motivators or pressures are removed or no longer relevant, those individuals tend to revert back to their previous behaviors. And compliance often lacks the sustainability seen in behaviors that are driven by intrinsic motivations or strong personal values. Now, compliance is also considered one of the least effective forms of behavioral change in the context of motivation. It relies on external factors, as we said, to drive behaviors, and it's not tapping into the individual's internal values, their beliefs, or desires. So, as a result, it may not lead to those lasting, meaningful changes in behavior. For instance, say this teenager here is cleaning up the room and they're only doing it to avoid punishment or because they want to go out with their friends, right? But there are levels to compliance. At its most basic level, compliance is just public or outward conformity, while possibly keeping one's own original beliefs and values to their self. Identification, on the other hand, is the next level of compliance. It's a bit higher than just mere compliance. It's still a bit superficial, though, as far as this level, where the person changes their behavior to match the expectations of others, but they do not necessarily agree with those expectations. And this is motivated by the desire, again, to be liked and accepted. So, in this stage, individuals not only change their public behavior to align with the requesters, but they also adjust their private beliefs and attitudes, but typically only when they're in the presence of those others. So identification is often driven by normative social influence. Again, those social norms, what goes on around here. And as you'd expect, it can often lead to cognitive dissonance, especially when individuals find themselves holding conflicting beliefs or attitudes as a result of conforming to a group's norms. For example, a person may decide to go vegan because all of their roommates are vegan as well. However, when they walk past the McDonald's, they can't resist a Big Mac. And when they are away from their roommates, they still eat them Big Macs. So identification takes place when we're surrounded by a particular group. We change our private beliefs while in the presence of the majority, but not permanently. Some people also call this hypocrisy. But this adjustment in both public behavior and private beliefs is a significant step towards greater conformity to the group norms. But it can also evolve. And that evolution can result in internalization. And this is the highest level of conformity in the continuum of social influence. It occurs when individuals not only change their public behavior and beliefs, but also fully internalize and integrate those beliefs into their own value system and identity. In essence, internalization means that individuals have genuinely come to accept the group's norms as their own. And with internalization, it's primarily motivated by informational social influence, ISI, in other words. This occurs when individuals conform because they believe the group possesses superior knowledge, expertise, or information. They trust the group's judgments and adopt its norms because they genuinely perceive them as valuable and accurate. For example, if an individual is influenced by a group of Buddhists and converts to this faith, then their new religious way of life will continue without the presence of the group, as they have internalized this belief as true and this way of life as the correct way to behave. This becomes an integral part of their identity. So, how can this behavior occur? Basically, how susceptible are you to compliance? Are you easily persuaded? Compliance can result from a number of specialized techniques. A lot of these techniques can be viewed in the video that's been shared, The Science of Persuasion. However, I want to highlight one of the really interesting ones known as the disrupt and reframe technique.
The famous hypnotherapist Milton H. Erickson was well known for his remarkable ability to put people into trance. And one of his popular induction techniques is the so-called, and you probably heard about it, the so-called handshake induction. There are many videos out there in the internet. Most of them are probably staged, demonstrating this technique. And the basic procedure is that you simulate that you would like to shake the other person's hand, but in the last moment, you don't. So you break the pattern, you break the script for this automated act, and thereby you create a state of confusion, of disruption in the other person. Milton Erickson would have said, we engage, we occupy the other person's mind, and therefore it's no longer reactant, no longer resistant to hypnotic suggestions. The influence technique, the so-called disrupt then reframe technique that we want to discuss today, is based on the same principles. But in comparison to an handshake induction, which can be quite strange to observe, the implementation of the disrupt and reframe technique, the way it was tested by Davis and Knowles in 1999, is quite easy and inconspicuous. Participants were 220 citizens who were asked whether they would buy some Christmas cards or, in the second experiment, some note cards, which were created by developmentally delayed children and adults. And if they would buy these cards, they would support their local center for developmentally delayed children and adults. When the citizens were told in the control condition, well, they are $3, then only about 32 of the participants were willing to buy any of these Christmas or note cards. But when the experimenters used the disrupt then reframe technique, by telling the participant, well, they are 300 pennies. 300 pennies? What's going on? But in the next moment, the experimenter said, that's $3. It's a bargain. So at first, the seller created disruption by telling, well, it's 300 pennies. And when the other person was confused, he reframed it and he said, well, that's $3. It's a bargain. When they used this strategy, the compliance rate doubled up to 67%. Now you might say, well, maybe it's because they said it's a bargain. Maybe this wording, which was not present in the control condition, makes the difference. Well, that doesn't seem to be the case because they also had some other control conditions. And for example, in one condition, they reframed only and said they are $3, it's a bargain. And when they did so, the compliance rate was just the same as in the control condition. So it really seemed to be important that there was this order. First, the disruption, they are 300 pennies, and then the reframe. That's $3, it's a bargain. And what's also interesting about this study is that they also tried to replicate the results on the "that's not all" technique that we spoke about in the previous episode. Therefore, they had another condition in which the participants were told, well, the price was $5, but we are selling them now for $3. And by using this "that's not all" technique, they also sold more Christmas cards than in the control conditions. The success rate was 70%. So even a little bit better, even though not significantly better than the disrupt then reframe technique.
This is one of the really interesting ones. And you might be thinking back to, man, have I ever fallen prey to this? Has anyone ever used any sort of chaotic incident to throw my mind off and persuade or influence me to do something that maybe I didn't want to do by using this technique? Well, at least it's now one that you can be more mindful of moving forward. So my question is, how susceptible are you to compliance? Now, there is no surefire way to reduce our susceptibility to compliance techniques, but there are some things we can do to make it more difficult for others to influence us. First, it's important to be aware of the different compliance techniques that people use. And this could be techniques identified in that video, as I said, the science of persuasion or the one we just highlighted. And of course, these are ones that sales and marketing people often rely on, or more local level techniques. And local level techniques can include things like people being more likely to comply with requests from people they like and trust. So they'll get you to, like them or buy into what they're saying. People are also more likely to comply with requests if they believe that the other person will do the same for them in the future. Scratch my back, I scratch your back. That's the basic principle of reciprocity. And then third, people are more likely to comply with requests if they believe that the opportunity is limited or scarce, right? You ever get any of those emails from, campaigns or organizations you get do retail from, and like, we're running low, this is the last one, there's only 10 left. So this is a overview of compliance. Tune in on the third segment where we're going to discuss obedience. But before I wrap that, I do want to close with this sentiment. Like my mother used to tell me, think, listen, and think. We've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Don't jump to decisions. And if it sounds too good to be true, well, you likely know the rest. Tupac once said, if you let a person talk long enough, you'll hear their true intentions. Listen twice, speak once. Whether that's using critical listening, identifying if there's authenticity, assessing motivations, and being able to discern values. All of these things speak to being able to reduce our susceptibility to compliance techniques when it's not in our best interest.